Hey Reddit, I'm here to share a story that has been eating at me for years. It's a long one, but it's something I need to get off my chest. I've been grappling with my family dynamics for a while now, and the truth is, it's only recently that I realized just how broken everything was. Let me start with some context. I'm Maya, 22, and I grew up in what seemed like a typical suburban family. Mom, dad, and me, an only child. At least, that's what I thought for the longest time. My parents always seemed to have a strong marriage, but I didn't realize how many cracks had formed beneath the surface. I was oblivious to their issues until everything exploded in my face. It all started when I was around 16. A man, someone I'd never heard of before, reached out to my dad. I'll never forget that day. It was the kind of thing that sends shivers down your spine when you think about it. This guy, let's call him Sam, claimed that my mom had been involved in an affair with him years ago, shortly after marrying my dad. He wasn't just some random stranger, though. He was someone who had been in my parents' lives before they married, and the news he brought shook the foundation of everything I thought I knew. At first, my mom denied everything. She said there was no truth to it, and I trusted her. After all, why wouldn't I? She's my mother, but Sam wasn't going to let it go. He insisted that I might not even be my dad's biological child, and he wanted a paternity test to prove it. I don't think my dad ever truly believed him, but the seed of doubt had been planted. When my dad confronted my mom about it, everything went haywire. The tension in our house became unbearable. My mom's eyes were filled with guilt and denial, while my dad's face looked like it was crumbling. I remember feeling like I was caught in the middle of some tragic soap opera that I couldn't escape. For weeks, the atmosphere at home was thick with silence, accusations, and half-spoken words. Now, here's where it gets worse. Instead of offering comfort to me, my parents turned on me. The whole situation became about them, not about me. They argued that if the test showed I wasn't my dad's child, they'd have to cut me off, because it would mean I wasn't a part of their family in the way they had always believed. They didn't say it outright, but that was the vibe I got. Like I was an intruder, a mistake. That was the moment it hit me. The love I had always believed existed between me and my parents was conditional. Their love wasn't absolute. It was tied to this notion of who I was supposed to be, based on some piece of paper or biological test. I felt like an object, not a person. They didn't care that this entire situation was hurting me. They cared more about protecting their image and saving face than protecting me. Eventually, the paternity test came back, and the result confirmed what I had hoped. I was my dad's biological child, but the damage had been done. That sense of betrayal, that feeling of being disposable, never left. My parents never apologized, not even after everything was out in the open. They didn't acknowledge the emotional toll it had on me. They didn't care. In the months that followed, I began to see my parents in a different light. I realized how many of their actions were motivated by selfishness, pride, and an obsessive need for control. It wasn't just about the affair, but how they handled everything afterward. I wasn't allowed to be upset. I wasn't allowed to be angry. All they ever said was that things had changed now, and that I needed to understand that. I had to move on. They had moved on. So why couldn't I? The relationship between us grew colder. I stopped trusting them the way I once did. I went through the motions, but I wasn't emotionally there. My parents, oblivious to my distancing, continued on with their lives as if everything was normal. They didn't try to repair our relationship, didn't ask me what I needed from them. It was as if they had already decided that I was fine. I wasn't. At 18, I graduated high school, and as soon as I could, I left home for college. I wanted to get away from them, away from that suffocating atmosphere, away from the memory of what they'd put me through. I remember feeling a sense of relief the moment I stepped into my dorm. It was like I could finally breathe. For a while, I kept in touch with my parents out of obligation. We had superficial conversations, but I never felt close to them again. I was polite but distant, and I think they noticed. However, they never pushed for more. They never reached out to apologize. They just assumed I'd get over it. That time would heal everything. But for me, time only made the wound deeper. They never acknowledged my pain, never offered the apology I so desperately needed. Fast forward to 5 years later, I'm in my junior year of college when I get the phone call. It was my mom. Her voice sounded off. There was a heaviness to it that immediately put me on edge. She asked me to come home for a family meeting. Something was wrong. I knew it. I arrived at my parents' house to find out the most shocking news of my life. When I walked into my parents' house that day, the atmosphere felt different. It was like a fog had settled over everything, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I expected it to be something mundane, a family discussion about my graduation or future plans, but I could tell from the way my mom looked at me that it was more serious than that. We sat down at the kitchen table, my mom's face pale, and my dad looking tense, as though he was preparing himself for something painful. The conversation started slowly, like they were testing the waters, unsure of how to break the news. Then, my mom said something that completely flipped my world upside down. She told me that my sister Lily wasn't my dad's biological daughter. My mind went blank. Lily, my younger sister, had always been the golden child in my family, the one who could do no wrong, the one everyone doted on. She was 3 years younger than me, and to be honest, I'd always felt a little overshadowed by her, but never in a million years would I have imagined that the foundation of our entire family dynamic was built on such a lie. Mom went on to explain, in a shaky voice, that Lily was the product of an affair she had with Mark, an old family friend. Apparently, when I was about 12, my parents went through a rough patch, and during that time, Mom got involved with Mark. She hadn't meant for it to happen, and she insisted that she had deeply regretted the whole situation, but the affair resulted in Lily's birth. I couldn't comprehend it. I sat there, stunned, processing her words, trying to piece everything together. My mind raced as I tried to understand how something like this could have been kept a secret for so many years. And why was she telling me this now? It had been over 10 years since Lily was born. Mom explained that after years of therapy and trying to hold things together, she felt it was finally time to tell the truth. It was as if the weight of her guilt had reached a breaking point, and she couldn't live with the secret anymore. But here's the kicker. She said it wasn't just about Lily. It was about me, too. She said she wanted to come clean about everything because, in her mind, I deserved to know the truth. The words stung. I felt like I was being crushed under the weight of a truth that wasn't even mine to bear. And the worst part? My sister didn't even know about any of this. She had grown up believing my dad was her biological father, just like I had. It was like this whole other reality had existed right under our noses, and we were blind to it. But the emotional toll on me wasn't just about the fact that my sister wasn't my dad's biological child. It was the way my parents handled everything. They had been living a lie for all these years, and they never once thought to tell me. They hadn't even considered how this might affect me, how this revelation might break me in ways I didn't even know I could be broken. What hit me the hardest was the hypocrisy of it all. When the issue with Sam and the paternity test came up years ago, my parents had treated me like I was disposable. If the test had shown that I wasn't my dad's biological child, I was out, cut off, rejected. But now, when it came to Lily, they handled everything with a completely different approach. It wasn't fair. How could they have treated me like I was nothing, while treating Lily with such care and consideration? Why was I left to deal with the fallout of a mistake I didn't even make, while Lily was shielded from the truth for so long? I didn't know what to say. I was angry, confused, betrayed. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to make them understand how deeply this hurt me. But I couldn't. I just sat there, frozen, as Mom went on about how sorry she was, how much she wished things had been different, and how much she regretted keeping this secret for so long. Meanwhile, Dad sat quietly next to her, saying very little. I couldn't tell if he was angry, sad, or just defeated. It was like he was too overwhelmed to process any of this. He had always been the quiet one, the one who never really shared his feelings or opened up. But I could tell that this was hitting him hard. Not once did he try to explain himself. Not once did he try to tell me how he felt about everything. It was like he had given up trying to fix anything. But the more I thought about it, the more the anger bubbled up inside me. This wasn't just about Lily. It wasn't even just about my mom's affair anymore. It was about how I had been treated over the years, how my parents had acted like my feelings didn't matter, How they had been so ready to discard me when they thought I wasn't theirs based on a paternity test. But now they were acting like nothing had changed. It felt like I had been living in a world of lies, and I was just a pawn in their game. After a long silence, I finally found my voice. "So, what do you want me to do with all this information? How am I supposed to process this?" I asked. My voice barely above a whisper, but it felt like I was shouting. "You've spent my whole life telling me that everything's fine, that everything's normal, and now you drop this bomb on me like it's no big deal. You expect me to just accept it. How can I trust anything you say anymore?" My mom's face crumpled, and she reached across the table to grab my hand, but I pulled away. I wasn't ready to accept her touch, her apology, or anything she had to say. I needed space. I needed time. But most of all, I needed the truth. Not the version they wanted me to accept, but the full, honest truth about everything. I stood up and walked out of the room without another word. My head was spinning. How could they expect me to just forgive them for this? How could they expect me to just act like everything was okay? I didn't know what to do next, but one thing was clear. My relationship with my parents would never be the same again. I needed time to process, to think about everything they'd told me. But I also knew that I was done pretending that things were fine. Things were far from fine. And this secret, this betrayal, was the final straw. When I arrived at my parents' house for the so-called family meeting, I had no idea what I was walking into. I had already distanced myself from them emotionally over the past few years. And honestly, I didn't care much about whatever it was they wanted to discuss. I just knew it was going to be awkward. I remember walking into the living room, where my mom was sitting nervously on the couch, and my dad was pacing by the window. Neither of them looked happy to see me, and that unsettled me more than I'd like to admit. Something was off. My heart started to race as I braced myself for whatever news they were about to drop. "Sit down, Maya," my mom said, her voice shaking a little. "We need to tell you something important." I sat down, my palms starting to sweat. I couldn't help but feel like I was about to hear something that would change everything again. My mind raced through a dozen possible scenarios, but nothing could have prepared me for what came next. My mom took a deep breath. "Maya, we need to talk about your sister." I felt the blood drain from my face. My sister, Lily, is my half-sibling. She's 18 now, and although she and I were raised together as full sisters, I knew something had always felt off about her relationship with our parents. She was always the golden child, the one my parents doted on, the one who could do no wrong. But still, I loved her, and I had always believed that no matter what, we were family. What my mom said next flipped everything I thought I knew upside down. "It's about Lily's paternity," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I stared at her, my mind racing. I had no idea where this was going. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice shaky. "Lily," my mom began, pausing as if weighing whether or not she could even say the words, "isn't your father's biological child. She's the result of an affair I had when I was much younger." I felt like the floor had been pulled out from under me. I couldn't believe it. How could this be happening again? This wasn't a story I could ever have imagined. It didn't even make sense. You're saying Lily isn't Dad's?" I asked, just to make sure I understood correctly. My mom nodded. "Yes, she's not his. I had a brief affair with someone who was an old friend of your father's. It only lasted for a few months, but I didn't think it would turn into something this complicated." I sat there, stunned, processing what she was saying. My mind kept going back to when I was younger, when I was the one whose paternity was questioned, when I was the one treated like an outsider by my own parents. Now, here was Lily, finding out the same thing I had gone through. But the difference was, my parents had always been so kind to her, so supportive. She was their princess, their perfect little girl. They had always showered her with love and affection, as though nothing could ever come between them. But for me, there was nothing but suspicion, coldness, and a constant feeling of being on the outside. Now I understood that the reason they had always been so harsh to me was because they were hiding their own secrets they couldn't bear to let out. I turned to my dad, hoping he might say something, hoping he might show me some shred of empathy or understanding. but his face was just as cold as ever. He didn't even seem to acknowledge my shock. He didn't even apologize for the way they had treated me years ago. Instead, he just said, "We thought it was time you knew. We don't want any more secrets between us." I couldn't help myself. I laughed bitterly. "You've got to be kidding me. You think after all this time, after everything that's happened, that I care about your secrets now?" Both of them stared at me, but I wasn't done. My emotions were boiling over, and I didn't care anymore. "Do you realize what this means?" I said, my voice rising. "For years you've treated me like I was the one who didn't belong, like I was the outsider, and now you're telling me that Lily isn't even your daughter? How is that fair? How do you think I feel about all of this?" My parents looked at each other, and for the first time in years, I saw a crack in their facade. But it wasn't the kind of crack that revealed any vulnerability. It was just guilt, and it didn't feel genuine. "Things are different now," my mom said, trying to justify her actions. "We're all trying to move on from the past, Maya. You have to understand. It's been hard for all of us." "Hard?" I didn't want to hear that. It has been hard for me. It had been hard for me to deal with being treated like I was disposable, like I didn't matter. It had been hard for me to grow up with parents who couldn't see past their own issues to see the damage they were doing to me. And now, I was supposed to just understand? "I'm done understanding," I snapped. "You've never apologized for what you put me through. You never cared about how I felt when you treated me like dirt. But now, when it's Lily, it's all different. You're making excuses for her. You're treating her like she's the one who matters, while I was left to fend for myself." My dad stood up, clearly frustrated. "You're making this more complicated than it needs to be. We're family. You should be happy we're telling you this." Happy? Happy that I had been lied to for years? Happy that I was treated like an afterthought? No, I wasn't happy. I was furious, and I had every right to be. This isn't about Lily. This is about the fact that I've been treated like crap for years while she gets to have everything handed to her on a silver platter. You never treated me the same way, and you still don't. You never took my side when I needed it, but now I'm supposed to just sit here and be okay with the fact that you've been hiding this from me all along. The conversation devolved into more shouting, with my parents trying to justify their actions, and me feeling more alienated with every word. But I had made up my mind. This wasn't about forgiveness anymore. I wasn't going to let them gaslight me or manipulate me into thinking this was some normal family drama. I was done. After everything that had happened, I thought I was done. I was firm in my decision to cut ties with my parents. I was emotionally drained, and I just couldn't bear to continue pretending that everything was fine. I had graduated, started my own life, and had already distanced myself from them emotionally for years. It felt like the right time to make it official. There was no point in staying in a relationship with people who had hurt me so deeply and never seemed to care enough to make amends. I thought they'd leave me alone, that they'd accept my decision. But I was wrong. A few days after I decided to stop all contact, my parents showed up at my apartment, uninvited. They knocked on my door with an intensity I hadn't seen in years. I had no idea what they wanted, but my gut told me it wouldn't be good. I wasn't surprised when they walked in with stacks of paperwork. Honestly, I didn't even know what to expect anymore, but I knew it wasn't going to be a friendly visit. They began to tell me how they'd done everything for me. My mom, especially, went on and on about how they'd paid for my entire college tuition and helped me with other expenses, like rent and books. She was pointing to the numbers on the pages, showing me calculations from their accountants about how much money they'd spent over the years. She made it sound like I owed them something, like I had taken advantage of their generosity all these years. The truth was, I never asked them for any of that. I didn't force them to pay for my college or my rent. They offered. They were my parents. It wasn't a loan or something I had signed up for with a written agreement to repay. I was their child, and they had made the choice to support me. But suddenly I was being painted as some kind of leech, someone who had been taking advantage of them this whole time. I tried to keep my cool, but I was furious. They couldn't see what they'd done to me, the emotional damage, the years of neglect, the manipulation. I couldn't understand why, after everything that had happened, they still thought they had a right to claim I owed them anything. I didn't owe them an apology. I didn't owe them any money. and I sure as hell didn't owe them my respect after everything that had gone down. I snapped. I told them I was done, that I never wanted to speak to them again. I reminded them of everything they'd done, the betrayal, the lack of compassion, and how they had never taken responsibility for it. I told them that they had failed me as parents, and that I was done trying to fix something that was beyond repair. They got angry, accusing me of being ungrateful. They called me selfish, even tried to guilt-trip me by saying that they had sacrificed everything for me, and that I was throwing all of it away. At that point, I just stopped listening. I knew what they were doing. They were trying to make me feel like I was the one at fault, trying to twist the narrative so that I looked like the bad person. But I wasn't going to fall for it anymore. A few days went by, and I assumed they would just leave me alone. But then I woke up to a flood of notifications on my phone, texts, calls, DMs from friends and family. Apparently my parents had taken the situation public. They created an Instagram account specifically to post about me. The account had my name in it, the kind of thing that immediately makes you feel like your whole world is being aired out to strangers. They'd posted screenshots of their transactions with me, everything from tuition payments to rent, even down to little things they bought for me over the years. They were trying to paint me as a user, a taker, someone who had only kept in contact with them to get what I needed and then cut them off the second I didn't need them anymore. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. This was nothing but a public smear campaign. I didn't deserve to be dragged through the mud like this. I had never asked for any of the money they gave me. They'd offered it freely, and I had accepted, not because I was using them, but because I was their daughter. But now, they were trying to manipulate everyone into thinking I had been exploiting them all along. I was beyond embarrassed. I don't like drama. I don't like airing my personal life out for others to see, especially not in such a cruel and one-sided way. I wanted to just crawl into a hole and disappear, but I knew I couldn't let this go. I couldn't just let them define my story for me. I tried to reach out to them, hoping they'd see the reason and take down the posts. I was calm, even polite at first, explaining how this wasn't fair, and how it was damaging not just to me, but to them as well. But they ignored my messages. They didn't care about how I felt or how this was affecting me. All they cared about was winning, about trying to make me look bad to everyone else. After 24 hours of trying to reach them and getting no response, I decided I wasn't going to sit in silence anymore. I had nothing to hide, and I wasn't going to let them control the narrative. So I did the one thing I knew would stop them in their tracks. I told the truth. I posted a message on my own social media accounts, explaining everything, my side of the story, the things my parents had never told anyone. I explained how they had treated me for years, how they had been manipulative and selfish, and how I had always been the one trying to make things work. I laid everything out in detail, with no shame, no hesitation, and I threatened them. Not that I intended to follow through, but I knew it would get their attention. I told them that if they didn't take down their posts, I would take legal action for defamation. I knew they didn't have any real grounds for a lawsuit, but I needed them to understand that I was serious. To my surprise, it worked. Within hours, they deleted the Instagram account and all the posts. But it didn't end there. I had already made my statement, and now my extended family and friends were reaching out to me. They were angry on my behalf. Many of them didn't know the full story until I shared it, and now they were distancing themselves from my parents, disgusted by how they had treated me. It felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I had finally stood up for myself, and in doing so, I realized that I wasn't as alone as I had thought. I wasn't the villain in this story. My parents were. After I posted everything online, I knew the fallout would be intense. What I didn't expect, though, was how quickly everything would turn against my parents. At first, I thought I was just venting, hoping for some kind of understanding from my friends. But as soon as I hit post, I realized I had made a decision that would send ripples through everything I thought I knew about my family. Within hours, my parents responded. They had created an Instagram account and posted screenshots of all the financial transactions they had made with me over the years. Every gift, every loan, every bit of help they had given me. The captions were loaded with accusations, trying to paint me as a user who had taken advantage of their kindness without ever showing gratitude. They framed themselves as victims, suggesting that I had been nothing but selfish and ungrateful. I was stunned. I had never expected them to go this low, to drag our family drama into the public eye. It was humiliating, to say the least. I felt violated, like my entire life was being exposed for everyone to judge. It wasn't enough that they had hurt me emotionally. They now wanted to make me look bad in front of everyone. At first, I tried to ignore it. I told myself that it was just their way of lashing out. But it didn't take long before I realized they weren't going to stop. They wanted me to look like the villain, and they were more than willing to make me suffer in the process. I tried to reach out to them privately, asking them to take down the posts. I explained that I didn't want this to become some kind of public spectacle, that I was simply trying to deal with everything in my own way, but they ignored me. The posts stayed up, and their accusations grew more vicious with every passing day. That's when something inside me snapped. I wasn't going to let them destroy me like this. I wasn't going to let them control the narrative and twist everything into something I wasn't. So I decided to fight back. I posted the full story. I wrote out everything. The paternity test drama, the affair, the double standard they had shown toward Lily and me. I shared my side of the story without holding back, explaining how I had been treated like a disposable child when they thought I wasn't biologically theirs, and how they had shielded Lily from the same treatment, even though she wasn't really their child either. I told the truth about the emotional abuse I had endured, about how they had never once apologized or acknowledged the harm they had done to me. I didn't stop there. I also made it clear that if they didn't take down the posts, I would explore legal action. I wasn't exactly sure if I could do anything legally, but the threat felt empowering. It was like I finally had some control over my own story. The response was immediate and overwhelming. People who I hadn't heard from in years, friends and family members, started reaching out to me. They offered support, empathy, and most importantly, understanding. It felt like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders, knowing that there were people who believed me, who saw my pain and stood by me. But for my parents, the tide quickly started to turn. Their attempt to shame me publicly had backfired. Rather than gaining sympathy, they found themselves in the center of a backlash. Extended family members, some of whom I hadn't spoken to in ages, began distancing themselves from my parents. They couldn't believe what my parents had done, not just to me, but to the entire family. The best part, my parents finally realized that their plan to turn everyone against me wasn't working. They deleted the Instagram posts, but it was too late. The damage had been done. People had already seen the truth, and they couldn't undo it. I didn't feel sorry for them. In fact, I felt validated. For the first time in years, I felt like I had taken control of my life, my story. I wasn't the villain in this situation. They were. As my parents tried to salvage their reputation, I stayed firm. I didn't need their approval or their love. I had already chosen to cut them out of my life, and nothing they could do would change that. I knew they would try to guilt-trip me, try to make me feel like I was being unreasonable. But I had heard enough of their excuses and manipulation over the years. Their love had always come with strings attached, and I wasn't going to play that game anymore. Now, I was finally free. Free from the lies, the gaslighting, and the toxic dynamic that had defined my relationship with them for far too long. I had no desire to go back to a family that had betrayed me in ways that couldn't be undone. I was done with them. And for the first time, I felt like I was truly done for good. The fallout from that family meeting was immediate and intense. After I stormed out of my parents' house, I didn't look back. I didn't want to hear their apologies or justifications anymore. To be honest, I didn't even want to engage with them on any level. I was done. And that feeling of finality, although terrifying at first, soon gave way to a sense of liberation. For a while, my parents tried to reach out. Texts, voicemails, and even emails, each one more desperate than the last. They wanted to fix things, to talk things through, but I wasn't interested. Not after everything they'd put me through. I couldn't pretend that it was all fine when I knew the truth. They had never really cared about my feelings. Not like they did for Lily. It wasn't just about the paternity tests, or the affairs, or the lies. It was the way they had always made me feel like I didn't matter. Every time they'd threatened to disown me over something I couldn't control, every time they chose their image over my well-being, it all came flooding back. How could I trust people who had never cared to protect me from emotional harm? In the weeks that followed, I focused on my life outside of them. I had just graduated college and was starting my first real job. Slowly, the pain of their betrayal became more bearable as I built a new support system. Friends, roommates, mentors, they all had my back. They reminded me that family isn't just about blood. It's about who shows up for you when it matters. And the people who showed up for me weren't my parents. I was growing more and more comfortable with my decision to cut them out. Sure, there were moments when guilt crept in, especially when I thought about my younger brother, Evan, who was still living with them. He was 15, and I hated the idea of him being caught in the middle of all this. I reached out to him a few times, but he always seemed torn. I understood. He didn't have the luxury of making the same choice I did. He was still too young to see things clearly, to understand the gravity of how my parents treated me. But it was hard, knowing he was still there with them, hearing their side of the story, and being fed all the same lies. At times, I thought about reaching out to him more seriously, but I didn't want to drag him into the mess. If he ever decided he wanted to talk or needed me, I'd be there for him. But for now, I had to focus on my own healing. One day, I woke up to find that my parents had taken their drama to social media. They'd created an Instagram account, of all things, to paint me as a selfish, ungrateful daughter. They posted screenshots of financial transactions, trying to show that I'd taken advantage of their generosity for years. It was childish, embarrassing, and totally not the kind of drama I wanted to be involved in. But I couldn't just sit back and let them tarnish my reputation without defending myself. I wanted to stay above it all, but this wasn't something I could ignore. After a few days of silently fuming, I decided to take control of the narrative. I posted my side of the story on social media. I told the truth about the emotional abuse, the way I had been treated like a second-class child, and how they had never apologized or acknowledged their part in hurting me. I wasn't looking for sympathy, but I was done being their scapegoat. I even threatened legal action, though I wasn't really planning to pursue it. It was just a way to get them to take down their posts. And you know what? It worked. They deleted everything almost immediately, but not before the damage was done. The truth was out there. And once it was, people started reaching out to me. Friends, extended family, even old acquaintances, telling me they had my back. My parents' attempt to paint me as a villain backfired in a way I hadn't expected. Instead of isolating me, it isolated them. Their friends, their family, even some of their closest relatives distanced themselves from them. They were left to face the consequences of their actions. At the end of it all, I felt vindicated. I wasn't looking for revenge, but I needed people to understand my side. For the first time in years, I felt like I was in control of my own story. Now months have passed. My life has started to settle into something that feels real and solid. I have a good job, a few close friends, and a sense of peace that I never thought I'd find. I still have moments where I think about my parents, and there are days when the loss stings, especially when I think about the family I could have had. But then I remember how they treated me, and I'm reminded that sometimes moving on isn't just the right choice, it's the only choice. As for my parents, they still try to contact me from time to time. They still try to guilt trip me, to make me feel like I'm the one in the wrong. But I know better now. I'm not responsible for their mistakes or their dysfunction. I'm responsible for myself, and I'm moving forward. They've made their bed, and I'm done lying in it. I finally found peace without them. 4-0 Mini.